At this point, every information portal is saturated with mindfulness content. But this show is a unique, unusual, curious take on mindfulness. Some of what you hear will be completely new to you. Let's dive in and take a look at the nature of the aware mind. I invite you to deepen your awareness so that you may be liberated and inspired. I'm Sarah Vallely, professional coach. I help people overcome anxiety, heal from past trauma, improve their relationships, and maintain better work-life balance. Welcome to our first episode of Season 2 of the Aware Mind podcast. I have some sad news. Jacob, my co-host, is not going to be with us for Season 2, so he will be really missed. I'm so grateful for all the time that we spent together on this podcast. But I've got some great guests lined up, and I am interviewing for a new co-host. So we will continue on with the Aware Mind. Today, my guest is Liv Melver, and she is a life coach helping people move through transitions. We will hear more about that. She's also the mother of 3 children. She lives in Saudi Arabia, but she grew up in Washington State. And she is also one of my clients and one of my students going through the PTSD Mindfulness Coach Certification Program. Can't wait to hear more about Heather and her experience with mindfulness and coaching.
I work specifically with women and teenagers who are experiencing some sort of transition or period of change in their lives. And I just support them through the process of trying to find a way to kind of lean into what I call the messy middle of change. We try to skirt around it sometimes, thinking it will save us time or pain or energy. And the reality is that if we skip the hard parts, oftentimes we get bumped back to them in ways that we weren't expecting.
I would imagine working with your clients and going through these difficult transitions that uncertainty is probably a challenge. You're just in the middle of all this uncertainty, and it brings up probably fears at some of the challenges that your clients are facing.
Definitely, 100%. I would say uncertainty is a commonality between almost all of the clients that I work with. Yeah, I just try to help support them through the process of finding, if not comfort, at least the fact that they can connect with themselves in some way every day, that we always have that. We always have the control to connect with our breath, the moment, that it's about the process versus the outcome.
I haven't spoke much about my online mindfulness meditation center called TSD Mindfulness. T is tame the mind, S is soothe the gut, and D is dwell in the heart. It's a specific type of mindfulness practice that I teach to individuals and then also teach to people who want to be mindfulness teachers. I train and certify mindfulness teachers, and I also train and certify mindfulness coaches. And so I'm really curious, Heather, you've been through my program, you're over halfway, you've taken the coursework and lots of coaching, and what you've learned about uncertainty and embracing uncertainty, are there elements there that you see incorporating into your life coaching?
100%. I came to understand in my own life that when there was uncertainty, when there was fear, that mindfulness was a tool that I always had available to me, regardless of where I was, what my circumstance was, what my finances were.
I remember during one of our coaching sessions, we were talking about how our thinking is something that we rely on so much. And sometimes we rely on our thinking too much. You know, we're in a situation and we rely on our thinking to get us out. So we go into problem solving mode. We go into analyzing outcomes, projecting into the future. And some of the work that we did is to realize that our thinking is not always what we need to rely on to move through a circumstance, that sometimes we can let things go and things kind of work out on their own, or we might get an insight, you know, when we really still our mind and quiet ourselves, then we just kind of get this insight, information that's guidance that's just exactly what we need to hear.
It was such a powerful process for me working with you on that. So much of it I knew intellectually. I studied clinical social work. I worked as a school counselor for many years. These were things that I knew, as helpers. I think we know and understand intellectually. But when I met you, I think it was back in May of 2022, my level of anxiety was through the roof. My nervous system was pretty constantly activated. I was coming off a really rough couple of years where our family had been divided a lot on different continents due to COVID, just a lot of uncertainty with my daughter's health. It was like I needed a reset. And so I came to you wanting to explore coaching. And what I realized was that it was just such a gift of being able to deepen my own practice and develop my toolkit further surprisingly quickly through using some of the tools that we worked through together and exercises regarding quieting the mind, taming my mind. What happened was I realized that my gut, my nervous system was so activated. I was in constant fight or flight. And I didn't even know because my mind was so busy. And so working through those exercises with you, I really quickly moved from this idea of taming the mind to soothing my gut. And in doing that, I was able to better understand the fears that were underneath the thoughts and these sensations I was experiencing in my gut and my body, and then move through offering myself some support and self-compassion. In a course of 6 months, I went from being highly activated, lacking confidence, to a place where I was ready to launch my business and move forward. I quit my job and decided I was going to put all my effort into this. And it was not a scary thing because it was like the decision was already made for me because I was dwelling so much in my heart that I could just open up and trust. It's like the path was illuminating in front of me. Mm-hmm. And the next choice was just there. When I talk to people about it, I describe it as that it almost wasn't even a choice. It was just the next right thing was right there in front of me. And it's just a completely different way of moving through life. That's not to say my nervous system still doesn't get activated or my thoughts, because they do. And I have a better idea now of how to manage it when it happens. But I would say that is the number one example when my family members or friends ask me, what I've gotten out of this practice of mindfulness. It's this connection to my intuition, to my heart center, whatever you want to call it. And it allowed me the opportunity to fulfill a dream that I'd always had, but never had the strength or courage to step into.
I think for you and many people I work with, your nervous system was an obstacle. We all go into fight or flight on a frequent basis, but some of us get stuck in it for longer periods of time, those of us who are diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, especially. And so I know that you had mentioned that you got diagnosed with general anxiety disorder and possibly had PTSD. We would love to hear more about your background.
I was born in Washington State, as you said, and my parents made their career teaching in international schools. I went to 9 different schools, K through 12. We lived in Nigeria and Saudi Arabia and Italy. On New Year's Eve of, I think it was 80 to 81, we were traveling in Kenya. We were in Nairobi and we were staying at a really nice hotel. My parents had splurged on a really nice hotel and they were having this New Year's Eve party that was like dress up, right? So I could see them getting ready for the party and there were masks and all these fun things that as a kid and a dramatic kid, in general, a person with a flair for the dramatic. And then my parents offered me the option to go to see a movie. I think it was Superman 2. And it was such a hard choice. And I chose to go to the movie. And while we were at the movie, a bomb went off at our hotel. And that room that I had seen all the people getting ready and everything, the ceiling collapsed and, several people were killed and injured. And As a child, while I might not have understood the trauma of it completely, I mean, we did go back to the hotel to get our things. When we were trying to get back to the hotel, we were stopped in traffic and told to go somewhere else. And we did go back and get our things. So I saw it. I think this family story came up where I saved our lives because or Superman saved our lives. And I did because I made that choice. And my mother was expecting my sister at the time. I wonder if that's some of where my sense of like trying to control everything around me, because if I make the wrong choice, people die. People with machine guns on the street. And in some countries, and then my family was living in Saudi Arabia during the first Gulf War. I actually went to boarding school in Oregon at the time. My parents and my sister were there and they had gas masks. They had to go into their bathroom when there were like air raids and Scuds going overhead and Patriots. And I was far away and had no control. And, this was before the time of internet or anything. I had a calling card and I would call, like we had a phone date once a week. I would call from a payphone to talk to them. It was a very uncertain and scary time. And I'm seeing things on the news in the US, trying to understand what's really happening on the ground, how the news is so fear-mongering. And so that was a very difficult time for me. Again, being afraid of bad things happening to people I love. I was safe physically. I was not safe emotionally, but I was safe physically. In 2001, I was on a university campus. I was working in university admissions, and there was a school shooting on our campus. And that was very traumatic. And we were living in New York City, my husband and I, during 9/11. And he was working a few blocks from the World Trade Centers. And I was in graduate school at Columbia studying clinical social work. A lot of this kind of trauma that I almost felt unworthy of. I felt like it wasn't good enough trauma, right? Like nothing terrible happened to me. I wasn't in a building when it was bombed. I wasn't having to go hide in the bathroom with a gas mask on when there were missiles going overhead. I wasn't walking out from ground zero through the dust and the papers flying at the air. I was always at a safe distance physically. So I can feel the emotion coming to the surface just talking about it. Which is actually a relief to me, because as I first started talking, it was all in my gut. I was feeling sick, but now that I feel the release of the emotion coming through my heart, it's a sense of relief. Because I've come to a place now, I think I did a lot of therapy. I met with psychiatrists and was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and panic, and just a few markers away from PTSD. It was really through coaching and mindfulness that I have been able to move into this place where I've been able to let go of feelings of shame and the faulty logic in my brain. Like if anyone else were to tell me this story, I would be like, oh my gosh, girl, that was a lot, right? Like, of course, that's traumatizing. But when I hear myself say it, I'm like almost ashamed because I feel like it wasn't bad enough. The reality is, it doesn't matter what you experienced. If your little child brain and your body is holding on to all of that, it's going to come out again later in some way, shape, or form. No wonder sometimes I don't want to get out of bed. No wonder sometimes I compartmentalize things in my life so that I don't have to think about, oh, I've got 2 kids in North America right now on the West Coast. What if there's an earthquake? What mindfulness has given me is the ability to live more deeply and honestly in the moment. Now that I've learned how to really be present in the moment, now I want to connect or reconnect with my heart, with the people around me, with all those things I was putting a wall up around because I was so afraid.
This idea that my trauma wasn't big enough. Oh man, how many of us go through that? I wonder for how many years that type of thinking interfered with your ability to heal. Also, you can think about the research that shows that nurses are getting diagnosed with PTSD due to what they're hearing from their patients. And there's also research that shows that you can get PTSD from bystander video watching the news. We really can't compare trauma. We're all affected by it. And when you were talking about moving into the heart and healing, I think there's two major things that helped you through this. One was that moving into the heart and moving into that healing. And I think maybe part of that process for you and lots of clients that I work with is that validating the fear, validating the sadness, things that you missed, the loss of feeling peace during certain times of your life, and validating that and creating space and healing it. And there might have been some tears and moving through that. So there's that process that can be so healing for anxiety. And then the other, you talked a lot about your nervous system. Our nervous system is something that we can retrain over time. Like our nervous system gets triggered. It learns to get triggered in certain situations and it learns to just stay triggered. And so you doing those exercises, you retrain your nervous system to ease through. Yes. Okay. This is a situation, I'm getting a little triggered, but I'm also going to soothe myself and move back to an untriggered state. And I remember talking to you during coaching that two of the things that you found really helpful were affirmations, saying affirmations about safety, and also gratitudes, just taking a moment to say gratitudes. And that sounds so simple, but the nervous system is very simple. It responds really well to affirmations. You can notice in your body that you're getting soothed. You can notice in your body that your nervous system is deactivating.
The first affirmation that really helped me was right now it's like this, recognizing the kind of temporary nature of discomfort. Definitely validation. It's understandable that I feel blank. The first thing I did, and I'm trying to remember, I pulled up the sheet because I couldn't remember what you called it, was gut sensations and concerns. So I would try to really notice the sensations in my gut. And then I would say, thank you. I would tell my gut, thank you for bringing this to my attention. Thank you for signaling to me that my nervous system has been activated. And then what are you trying to tell me? That would usually bring me to a fear, something that I was afraid of. Maybe I was afraid of failing or disappointing or afraid of being still, trusting. Then that allowed me to move into a stability exercise where I created some stability for myself, and then offering some affirmations around. Sometimes it was just, I'm enough. This is enough. This moment is enough. Sometimes it was, even though I'm scared, I'm loved. Even though I'm scared, I'm worthy. And I love sticky notes. So, certainly in my sitting practice, I would use them. But then also, like, if something really stuck with me that I thought of or came up to me after a meditation practice, I would write it down. My responsibility is to honor love, joy, and pleasure as much as I honor my work. When these things come to me, I put them up so that when things are hard during the day, I have that sort of visual reminder as well. And gratitude. I have a daily gratitude practice besides, using gratitude in my sitting practice of meditation. Every day, at the very least, I'm not a journaler. But I have become one, and it's because I gave myself the grace to not do it the way I thought was right. And I just started saying, okay, every day I'm going to write the date and I'm going to write 5 things I'm grateful for. And I just write it like a bullet list. And if there's anything else that I feel like writing, I will. And now I'm writing like a page and a half every day. And I do it in the morning after my sitting practice because I find a lot comes up through my sitting practice that I think if I did it before it, that I wouldn't be as open to the insights.
Yeah, I often tell my clients that a gratitude practice is so powerful that it puts me out of business. I mean, it's just, it really, you don't need me in coaching if you have this really great gratitude practice. It does tame the mind. When you have your gratitude practice, you notice your cognition, your thinking just kind of slows down and stills. and it does soothe your nervous system, and it does help you just dwell in the heart. I mean, gratitude is in the heart. So it's just so powerful. Another thing that I talk about in my classes is the joy pain experience. I talk about how when we finally tame our thinking and we soothe our nervous system and we can just move our consciousness into our hearts and dwell there and be there, we open the door to our deep emotions, these deep emotions of gratitude, these deep emotions of love, and also some of the difficult emotions of pain and hurt. And sometimes we actually experience them at the same time. It's a really kind of bizarre but beautiful experience. And during the beginning of the pandemic, I was out in the middle of the lake on my paddleboard, and I had one of those experiences. I just collapsed, knelt down on my paddleboard and cried in sadness for all the children's lives that were so affected by the lockdown, and also just felt the joy of being a human being who was able to feel that. I was able to feel that sadness of all the children, and I just had so much gratitude, and it actually in a weird way brought me some joy to be just a full human being in this experience. You had shared with me your own joy pain experience being at a choir concert. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that if you feel okay with sharing.
Of course. Yeah. It was all coming back to me as you were talking about it. Yeah. So there has been a lot of crying in the last 3 or 4 months, I'd say, as I've kind of had my mindfulness breakthrough. My youngest daughter is almost 12, and she's always like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah. Yeah, I'm really, really well." That's where all these tears are coming from, because it's real emotion. We went to a holiday concert here, and it was the first time I had experienced live music since the pandemic. We were going, I said, "You're not going to believe it's the most beautiful silent night that I've ever heard in my life," because I'd been able to rehearse it a couple times, and they were accompanied by strings and a piano. I just wept. I mean, the tears, I wasn't sobbing, but I was weeping. Like the tears were streaming down my face, because it was such a beautiful moment. I mean, there's the juxtaposition of listening to Christmas choral music in Saudi Arabia, which is a Muslim country and hasn't had a lot of religious freedom up until the past few years. And then it was this community experience of the whole room, all these people being there, witnessing this moment of beauty and creativity and the message behind it, and also acknowledging how long we'd gone without it. This concert was typically a yearly thing, and it was the first one in like 3 years or something like that, right? So just an acknowledgement of all that we'd been through during that time, and coming out in the beauty of the music. Yeah, I just had a deep release of emotion, and it was a mix of joy and pain. It was acknowledging the pain of this shared experience that, the globe had, which I told my daughters. I said, "Someday you're going to look back on this and realize this is a shared global experience that does not happen very often."
That's beautiful. One other question I wanted to ask you. A lot of people are using meditation apps, and it's something that always kind of gets me stuck. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around it, because I began meditating before YouTube. So there were no apps, there wasn't YouTube. I literally went to a class and learned how to meditate. I have this belief that they're hardly comparable. Sitting and having your own practice compared to using an app is just not a comparable experience. And so if I remember correctly, there was a point where you were using a lot of apps. Maybe you still are, but I know you do also have your own self-guided practice. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about the comparison between those two experiences.
You are right. They are completely different experiences. On the one hand, I appreciate the idea of access, giving a large number of people access. And again, on the flip side, I talked earlier about how mindfulness is something that we have available to us no matter where we are, no matter our finances. I use two apps. One I use specifically for something called sleep stories. One of my favorite activities is reading. My favorite kind of safe memories are of listening to my parents read me books at nighttime, or listening to my husband read my girls' stories, or me do it, So I find sleep stories very soothing. So I love that I put on this story, someone has a beautiful voice, and I just kind of fall asleep. I don't think of it as meditation. I think of it more as almost like an audiobook or a podcast. It is completely different and separate from my sitting practice. I always wanted a more formal training because I knew it could be deeper. My body's natural process is about 15 solid minutes.
That 15 minutes makes a difference.
It has changed my life. I mean, I've done therapy, I've done medication, I've done all these different things to try to disrupt my nervous system. You name it, I've done it. But biofeedback, and this is the only thing I've experienced that completely disrupts whatever is happening and helps move me to a place of healing. And when those moments of discomfort come, I recognize them, I address them, I lean in instead of just like shoving it back down or trying to work my way out of it somehow. I try to get curious and connect with it instead.
You using the word disrupt. You had mentioned that in a coaching session once, and I've been using that with clients now. The exercises disrupt this thing that we're in, that we're stuck. It just really breaks us out of it. So I really appreciate you opening me up to using that term. And thank you so much for everything that you shared. I know our listeners can think about how they can incorporate some of these ideas into their own lives. Heather, would you speak your website to the listeners? And I will also include your website in the show notes.
Sure. It's minding the gaps. So instead of minding the gap, like they say on the train, like mind the gap, it has an S. So mindingthegaps.org.
And what will they find when they go to your website?
A little more about me, about my background, both professionally and personally, about all the ways that I love to engage people to support them during periods of transition. Yeah, but there's a little bit of everything about different ways that you can connect with me.
So glad that you're my first guest in season 2. What a wonderful experience.
I'm honored. Thank you.
The Aware Mind podcast is a TSD mindfulness production. Please check out our show notes for upcoming events and links to additional resources. Please visit our website at tsdmind.org. That is T as in tame, S as in soothe, D as in dwell, mind as in mindfulness.org. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at TSD_mindfulness.